The betrayal didn't come from across the border. It came from across the table. It didn't arrive with tanks or war drums. It arrived with a smile, a handshake, a familiar voice promising loyalty. President Ibrahim Traoré believed he had secured Burkina Faso's future. He believed that by standing tall against the old powers, by reclaiming his people's gold, their land, their pride, he had broken the chains for good. But in the quiet halls of his own palace, another war was brewing, one without gunfire, one without warning, a silent war where the sharpest weapons were trust and treachery, and the first wound was already bleeding unseen. It began as a feeling, a tension in the air thick enough to taste. At night, standing at the palace window overlooking Ouagadougou, Ibrahim could sense it, a wrongness. The city slept beneath a sky too still, too silent, as if holding its breath. For weeks, operations had been crumbling without clear reason. Secret military maneuvers somehow exposed. Hidden meetings compromised. Enemies moving through defenses as if they carried a map. His map. Ibrahim knew better than to call it coincidence. This was no accident. This was a blade being pressed to his back by a hand he trusted. Behind the walls of his palace, he had enemies wearing the faces of friends. Whispers twisted in the dark corridors. Smiles masked ulterior motives. Loyalty, once a shield, now became a dangerous unknown. Ibrahim had always known that pushing out the foreign troops, reclaiming his nation's wealth, would paint a target on his back, but he hadn't expected the dagger to come from so close, to come from someone who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him in the battlefield, someone who had shared bread, laughter, and oaths under the same sky. In the space where brotherhood once lived, suspicion now took root. Yet, he did not act in anger. He did not lash out or call for sweeping arrests. A single misstep could plunge his fragile nation into chaos. Instead, he chose patience, silence, the language of predators and survivors. He would not strike blindly. He would watch, he would wait. And when the moment came, he would cut through the darkness with precision. Because he knew, in war the first to act in rage often falls. And Ibrahim Traoré was not born to fall. He was born to endure, to adapt, to outthink those who mistook him for a simple soldier. The danger was invisible, like poison in a cup. The traitor was still at his table, still offering advice, still pretending loyalty, all while pulling invisible threads to unravel the dream of a free Burkina Faso. But dreams fought for are not so easily stolen. That night, standing alone at the window, the weight of history pressing against his shoulders, Ibrahim made a silent vow to the sleeping city below him. No matter who the traitor was, no matter what foreign hands reached into his country's soul, they would not find a man willing to surrender. And as the night deepened, as the world around him lay in unsuspecting sleep, Ibrahim's resolve hardened into steel. Across the table, betrayal had smiled. But across that same table, justice was already waking up. The hunt had begun, and this time, the shadows would answer for their sins. Captain Naba Zongo was not the kind of man most noticed at first glance. Young, precise, a man whose strength lived not in his volume, but in the sharpness of his instincts. While others spoke loud in meetings or swaggered in uniforms, Zongo watched, listened, remembered. It was why Ibrahim Traoré trusted him with tasks that demanded not noise, but absolute silence. And it was why, on a night that seemed as uneventful as any other, Zongo would stumble upon the thread that would unravel everything. His assignment was simple, routine, even. Monitoring radio frequencies in the northern sectors of Burkina Faso, looking for signs of rebel movement, unusual chatter, foreign interference. Hours of static, broken only by the occasional boring farming reports or marketplace updates. Nothing unusual, until he heard something that made his blood run cold. At first, it seemed like another agricultural transmission, dry statistics about millet yields and water supplies. But Zongo's ears caught the anomaly. There was a rhythm to the report. They didn't fit. A pattern underneath the numbers. He recorded it, isolated it, and began decoding. Slowly, painfully, the true message revealed itself. Maps, military coordinates, names of operations that only the president's most trusted circle should have known. It wasn't about crops. It was about war. Zongo's heart pounded as he pieced it together. Someone was feeding Burkina Faso's most guarded secrets through hidden channels, using the mask of routine agricultural updates to slip treason into the airwaves. He didn't hesitate. No chains of command, no bureaucratic delays. He picked up the secure line and called the only man who needed to know, President Ibrahim Traoré. The palace was locked down within the hour. Midnight air thick with unease, windows shuttered. Hallways dark, except for dim emergency lights. No phones allowed, no aides, no guards outside the inner circle. Ibrahim called his trusted few to a room deep within the palace. A room without windows, built for moments like these. A place where truth, no matter how ugly, would have nowhere to hide. Zongo entered with a small folder in his hands, his face tight with the weight of what he carried. Ibrahim, standing tall and calm at the head of the table, nodded once. No speeches. No ceremonies. Just action. Zongo, he said quietly, voice cutting through the thick silence like a blade. Show them. Zongo placed the decoded papers on the table. The men leaned in, generals, advisors, warriors who had fought beside Ibrahim. In darker days, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, like a slow-moving avalanche, the truth broke free. At the top of the documents, written in stark clarity, was a name that ripped the air from the room, Colonel Ouattara. Shock crackled through the gathering like a lightning strike. Colonel Ouattara, not just an officer, but a brother. A man who had once taken a bullet shielding Ibrahim in a desert firefight. A man whose laughter had filled palace corridors, whose children had played alongside Ibrahim's own. Trusted with the defense of the nation. Trusted with everything. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Faces paled, hands curled into fists or froze in disbelief. One of Ibrahim's oldest and closest allies was the leak, the traitor, the one feeding the country's enemies in whispers and shadows. Captain Dongo, a loyalist as fierce as he was silent, was the first to speak. His voice was low, steady, like a gun being cocked in the dark. He's been feeding them for months, Dongo said. Maybe longer. The room waited for Ibrahim's reaction. Would he rage? Would he lash out, call for immediate arrest, blood for betrayal? But Ibrahim did not even blink. Inside, it felt as though something precious had been ripped from his chest, the place where loyalty lived now raw, exposed, burning. But his face, carved in stone, gave nothing away. His eyes were cold, sharp, calculating. Leaders cannot afford the luxury of grief. Not yet. No one moves, he said, voice quiet but carrying the full weight of command. No one arrests him. No. One tips their hand. Confusion rippled through the room. Why wait? Why not strike now while the traitor was within arm's reach? Ibrahim inhaled, slow and deep. If there's a snake in this house, he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade through silk, we don't kill it yet. First, we follow it to the nest. Understanding dawned. This wasn't just about Ouattara. This was about everyone. He had touched, every hand he had shaken, every whisper he had traded in the dark. One man could not destabilize a nation alone. There were others, unseen, waiting, lurking just beyond the light. And so the game began. Over the next days, Ibrahim wore the mask of normalcy. He stood at podiums, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, addressing crowds with the same strength and calmness that had won him the people's trust. But behind those calm eyes, his mind was a battlefield. Watching, calculating, waiting for the snake to lead him to the rest of the nest. Ouattara moved through the palace as if nothing had changed. He smiled, he laughed, he offered advice, carried out his duties. But to Ibrahim, every gesture now told a different story. Every casual word was a potential blade. Every friendly nod a calculated threat. Behind the scenes, Captain Zongo and a hand-picked team began their work. They tapped Ouattara's calls, placed silent trackers under his car, mapped his every meeting, every handshake, every shadow he moved through. Nothing would be missed. Nothing would be left to chance. And still, Ibrahim waited. In the art of war, patience is sharper than any sword. A fool strikes too soon. A hunter knows when to let the prey wander deeper into the trap. The noose was tightening. The house still looked peaceful. The faces still smiled. But the storm was coming, and when it broke, it would break everything. Because if there was a snake in this house, Ibrahim Traoré was ready. Ready not just to strike, but to cut out. The rot by its very roots. The hunt had begun. The days that followed were a masterclass in quiet war. Captain Zongo's team moved like shadows, tracking Colonel Ouattara's every step with surgical precision. From the moment he left his home to the second he returned, Ouattara was never truly alone again. Invisible eyes followed his every move. Invisible ears caught every muttered word, every hushed conversation. No mistake could be allowed. No suspicion could be raised. Ibrahim had made it clear, the moment Ouattara sensed the noose tightening, the real enemy would vanish into the mist, leaving only ashes behind. At first, Ouattara's days were as expected. The meetings, briefings, formal dinners with diplomatic staff. A man carrying the mask of loyalty with such ease that even seasoned officers sometimes doubted the truth. But it was at night that the cracks began to show. Ouattara grew restless. His routines shifted. His movements took on the jittery rhythm of a man caught between fear and obligation. Then came the first real break. One night, well past midnight, Ouattara slipped out of the palace without his driver, without his official security escort. No official record. No explanation. A black car awaited him in the shadows. He slid behind the wheel himself, a soldier once proud enough to be chauffeured now creeping through the darkness like a fugitive. Zongo's team tailed him carefully. Headlights, off radios silent. Ouattara's route was always the same. Past government compounds, down quiet back streets, past shuttered shops and sleeping alleys, until he reached a nondescript house near the French embassy. At first glance, the house appeared abandoned. No lights, no visible guards, just another, forgotten building in a restless city. But Ibrahim Traoré was a soldier. He had seen safe houses before, in deserts, jungles, war zones, and he knew. Nothing was ever truly abandoned in a war fought from the shadows. The order came swiftly: install surveillance. Within hours, a hidden camera, no larger than a coin, was planted across the street, aimed directly at the building's entrance. No movement escaped its unblinking gaze. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Ouattara would arrive, enter the house, and vanish from view. He would emerge an hour later, calm, polished, composed. But on the 4th night, the camera captured everything. 2 foreign men were waiting inside, suits crisp, faces sharp, the gleam of calculation in their eyes. 1 American, 1 European. Without a word, one of them handed Ouattara a black suitcase. In return, Ouattara slid a folder across the table. The camera couldn't record sound, but it didn't need to. The body language was clear. The transaction was smooth, practiced, routine. Treason disguised as diplomacy. When the surveillance team reviewed the footage, the folder's markings twisted their stomachs into knots. It contained President Ibrahim Traoré's private travel, plans for the next month, his routes, his stops, his security contingencies. It was a death sentence wrapped in manila paper. That night, Ibrahim sat alone in a darkened room, watching the footage play on an endless loop. His jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles trembled. His hands balled into fists on the table, nails digging into skin. The man who once bled beside him in battle was now selling him like cattle at market, selling the dreams of a free nation, selling the future of children yet unborn for the weight of foreign coins and promises whispered across oceans. But Ibrahim did not rage. He grew sharper, colder, stronger. He picked up the secure line. Only 2 words passed through the wire. It's time. At dawn, the trap was set. Colonel Ouattara received a summons, routine, official, to attend a high-level security meeting at the Ministry of Defense. He arrived exactly on schedule. No alarms, no suspicion. His uniform was pressed, his boots shone, his smile was easy. He never saw it coming. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. No aides, no familiar faces. Just 10 soldiers in full combat gear, weapons slung across their chests, their eyes unreadable. And at the head of the room, standing like a mountain carved from granite, was President Ibrahim Traoré himself. For a heartbeat, Ouattara hesitated. Then the smile faltered. Then it disappeared. "You were my brother," Ibrahim said. His voice was low. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. It thundered against the cold concrete walls. Ouattara's mouth moved as if searching for words, but none came. There was nothing to say that could mend the hole burned into the heart of trust. "You sold this country," Ibrahim continued, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "For dollars, for promises, for lies." He nodded once, and Captain Zongo stepped forward, dropping the black suitcase onto the table. It clicked open, revealing stacks of crisp foreign bills, a USB drive glinting under the sterile lights, tiny trackers wrapped in plastic. Proof. Unquestionable. Unforgivable. "You're not going to prison," Ibrahim said, voice colder than the grave. "You're going to talk." And with that, the silent war inside the palace broke into open confrontation. Ouattara was escorted down a long, windowless corridor to a room deep beneath the ministry. A room designed for no escape, no hope, no windows, no clock, no voice but his own fear. He sat in the center of a concrete box, cuffed to a chair bolted to the floor. Across a one-way mirror, Ibrahim watched in stillness. He betrayed no emotion. But inside, a quiet ache gnawed at him. A man torn not by vengeance, but by heartbreak. This traitor had once fought beside him. Shared fires in the night, sworn oaths under starlight. They had dreamed of a free nation together. Now Ouattara sat hollowed out by greed, a ghost of the man he had once been. Hours passed, no questions asked, no threats made, only silence, heavier, with each tick of invisible time. Silence has a way of pressing in, of squeezing the soul, of whispering all the terrible things a man tried to hide even from himself. Finally, Ouattara broke. His shoulders sagged, his head dropped. "They came to me. A year ago," he whispered, voice raw. "Americans, Europeans. At first it was just talk, flattery, promises. They made me believe I could be someone important. They showed me papers, said after Ibrahim falls, after the elections collapse, I would have a place, a house in Paris, a post at the UN." He swallowed hard, unable to meet the cold gaze staring back at him through the glass. "I believed them," he continued, the words dripping shame. I thought they'd protect me, but now..." His voice cracked. "Now I see they were only using me." A long moment passed, then Ibrahim entered the room. He said nothing at first. He simply sat across from Ouattara, the silence stretching heavy between them. No accusations, no speeches, just the unbearable truth filling every inch of space. "You didn't just betray me," Ibrahim said finally, his voice steady, almost sorrowful. "You betrayed the mothers who raised sons to defend this land, the farmers who tilled this soil with bleeding hands, the children who dream of a future you tried to sell away for silver promises." Ouattara shook under the weight of it, unable to meet Ibrahim's eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Ibrahim stood slowly. "You'll answer for what you've done," he said, voice grave. "But first, you're going to help us finish what you started. Because in a war fought in silence, even the broken can be turned into weapons, and the betrayal that nearly destroyed them would now become the blade they drove into the heart of the enemy. But this was no ending. This was only the beginning. Trust is a powerful thing. When it breaks, it cuts deeper than any blade. But sometimes, if wielded carefully, even a shattered sword can still draw blood. Colonel Ouattara was broken, stripped of his arrogance, his pride dissolved into silence and shame. Yet in that brokenness, Ibrahim Traoré saw an opportunity. The foreign agents believed Ouattara was still theirs. They believed their secret weapons still moved freely inside the heart of Burkina Faso's government. And now, Ibrahim would use that belief against them. The plan was simple in its cruelty. Ouattara would continue to feed information. But this time, every whisper would be a lie, every document a carefully crafted trap. The snake would return to the nest, carrying not betrayal, but poison. Overnight, a new war began. Zongo's team forged false documents with expert precision, fake military routes, fabricated political plans, non-existent dissident networks. Maps were altered, communications rerouted, ghost operations spun from thin air. Every leak was deliberate. Every false move was calculated. Ouattara, still wearing the mask of loyalty, carried Burkina Faso's wrath into the enemy's hands, one lie at a time, and the embassies bit hard. The embassy network, once a silent web tightening around the presidency, began to fray. Low-level informants disappeared into the night, extracted quietly before they could sense the shift. One foreign agent, operating under the cover of a cultural attaché, was quietly expelled after a fake report led him to a secret arms deal, a deal that was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Another, a so-called humanitarian advisor, found himself exposed when he tried to attend a meeting that didn't exist. A third simply vanished, his last known location a cafe where Zongo's team had been waiting. Burkina Faso, once hunted, had become the hunter, and at the center of it all stood President Ibrahim Traoré. Calm, calculating, relentless. He came each night to the Ministry of Defense, entering through side doors, avoiding cameras, moving like a ghost through the war rooms. He didn't issue long orders. He didn't give speeches. He simply studied the maps, the names, the tangled webs of betrayal and counter-betrayal, and he pointed to where the next strike would fall. Then came the message they had been waiting for. A contact, using the alias Reed, reached out to Ouattara. Reed, the American agent who had orchestrated the betrayal from behind diplomatic walls. His words were coded but unmistakable. The final phase was near. The election was coming, and with it, their last chance to collapse the government from within. The meeting was set for midnight. A safe house outside the capital, quiet, urgent. The stakes were absolute. If this operation failed, the enemy would vanish into the shadows again, wiser, more cautious. If it succeeded, the rot at the heart of the plot could finally be ripped out by its roots. Ibrahim made the decision without hesitation. No uniforms, no flashing lights, no public spectacle. This would be a war fought with whispers and shadows, the way it had always been. Ouattara was wired, a tiny microphone hidden in his collar, a tracker woven into the seams of his belt. His hands trembled as he dressed for the meeting, but there was no turning back. This was his penance, his last chance to serve the country he had once betrayed. Outside the safe house, in the thick, choking darkness, Ibrahim's team waited. Captain Zongo, crouched beside a blacked-out van, adjusted his headset. His eyes, sharp and steady, never left the door. Inside the van, Ibrahim listened to every heartbeat, every breath. He wore no uniform tonight, just a plain jacket, a cap pulled low over his brow. He was not there as president. He was there as a soldier. At exactly midnight, Ouattara entered the safe house. The air inside was cold, stale with the scent of cigarette smoke and betrayal. Two men waited, Reed and another European agent whose face was unfamiliar but whose posture spoke volumes. A man used to pulling puppet strings from safe distances. "You've been quiet," Reed said, his voice cutting through the room like broken glass. His eyes bored into Ouattara's soul. "Is the president getting suspicious?" Ouattara kept his face blank, his voice steady, rehearsed 100 times in the silent hours before dawn. "He trusts me," he lied. Reed smiled, a sharp, humorless thing. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper laced with venom. "Good, because it's time. The president must fall before the elections. No more delays." Outside, in the darkness, Ibrahim heard the words, his jaw clenched so tightly that the headset crackled. There it was, the final proof. Not just destabilization, not just influence. They were planning an assassination, a coup masked as political collapse. It ends tonight, the signal was given. Silent, invisible, a tap on the comms, a nod in the shadows. Like ghosts, Zongo's team moved. No sirens, no shouting, just the precision. of men trained to fight in silence. The door burst open, guns raised. Not firing, just commands made in the sharp language of certainty. Reed froze. So did his partner. Surprise flashed across their faces for a heartbeat, quickly replaced by cold fury. "You're under arrest," Zongo said, voice flat. "You have no right," Reed snapped. "We're diplomats." "Not tonight," Zongo replied almost gently. "Tonight, you're caught. Cuffed, stripped of their weapons, stripped of their masks. Reed and his partner were dragged into the night, their dignity crumbling with every step. And then, through the broken doorway, Ibrahim entered. No guards. No weapons. Just a man, one man, standing against the silent army that thought they could break his country from within. Reed's glare was pure hatred. "You think you've won?" Ibrahim's voice was calm, unshaken, carrying the weight of something larger than personal victory. "I didn't win," he said. "Burkina Faso did." That morning, as the first light of dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the world woke to headlines that shook continents. Foreign spies caught in Burkina Faso coup plot. President Traoré exposes secret operation to destabilize African nation. Governments scrambled. Embassies went silent. Official statements, once smug and commanding, dissolved into vague denials and panicked diplomacy. But it was too late. The truth had already escaped into the winds. In the heart of the Kosyam Palace, Ibrahim stood alone on the rooftop, the city sprawling beneath him. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his fists in triumph. He simply breathed, deeply, steadily, feeling the weight of history pressing down and the stubborn fire inside him refusing to be extinguished. The city was awake now. The people were whispering, shouting, celebrating in markets, on dusty streets, under the fading stars. Radios buzzed with the news. Mothers held their children closer. Young men and women walked taller. Somewhere, a group of old veterans lifted glasses in silent salute. He had not just defended a nation, he had defended its soul. But Ibrahim knew the battle wasn't over. The foreign powers would regroup. They would find new faces, new strategies, new betrayals. This had only been one victory in a much larger war, a war not just for territory, but for the right to dream freely under an African sky. He turned his face into the wind, letting it carry the scent of his homeland, the sweat and hope of his people. There would be more storms, there would be more snakes slithering through the darkness. But now they knew. The lion was awake, and he was watching. The war for Burkina Faso's soul was far from over. The night after the arrests, a rare stillness settled over Ouagadougou. But it wasn't the heavy, anxious silence that had haunted the city weeks before. This was different. It was a silence of breathing spaces, of hope daring to stretch its wings again. It was the silence of a people realizing, maybe for the first time in a long time, that they had been seen, defended, and heard. Inside the Kosyam Palace, the lights were dimmed. No speeches had been drafted. No polished press teams stood ready. President Ibrahim Traoré needed none of that. Tonight there would be no teleprompter, no ghost-written lines. Only a man standing before his people, not as a ruler hungry for power, but as a soldier who had never stopped fighting. As the clock struck, Ibrahim stepped alone onto a simple wooden podium set in front of a single camera. His uniform was plain, the old battle-worn green of the revolutionaries who had fought before him. His medals were few, modest, tarnished by time but gleaming with meaning. In every village, on every battered radio, in every market stall with cracked speakers, his voice soon echoed. Calm, unwavering. "I speak to you tonight," he began, his words slow, deliberate, each syllable cutting through the dark like a blade. "Not as a president, but as your brother. As your son, as your soldier. Across Burkina Faso, breath held, foreign powers tried to poison our nation," he continued. "They came not with armies but with smiles. They whispered into the ears of our brothers. They tried to steal our future, to break our spirit." He paused. "Let the weight of the betrayal settle over every heart, every home. But they failed," he said, voice rising, firm as stone. Markets erupted with shouts. Hands slapped battered radios in celebration. Children clapped with no full understanding of why, only feeling the pulse of something powerful. I will never sell this country, Ibrahim said. Not for gold, not for promises, not for power. Burkina Faso belongs to its people, and I swear to you, with everything I am, I will protect it with my life. He raised his right hand. Not to claim, but to promise. This is my oath, he said, his voice thundering across hills and fields and crowded city squares. I will never kneel to foreign masters. Never again. The roar that followed wasn't one of anger. It was the roar of pride. Raw, undiluted, rising. From alleyways, from far-flung farms, from the cracked concrete of forgotten towns. Old men lifted their heads. Mothers wept quietly, feeling the promise carried on the night wind. Young men and women gripped each other's hands tighter. In that moment Burkina Faso was not afraid. It was awake. Later, when the cameras had gone dark and the crowd's energy softened into murmurs, Ibrahim stepped out onto the palace rooftop. Captain Zongo was waiting there, a quiet sentinel beneath the stars. You did well, Ibrahim said, his voice softer now. Zongo smiled, the humility of a man who understood the weight of loyalty. I followed your lead, sir. For a long while they stood together in silence, the city's faint heartbeat humming below them. They'll try again, Ibrahim said finally, his voice more thought than words. Different faces, different plans. Then, we stop them again, Zongo replied without hesitation, the fire of the people reflected in his eyes. Ibrahim nodded slowly, a small, fierce smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yes, he said. As long as we stand together, they'll never take this land. The lion had fought, the lion had protected, but the lion did not sleep. Not truly. Because somewhere, in the deep corners of the world, in shadowed offices and polished boardrooms, new plans were already being drawn, new betrayals prepared, new wars whispered. But Ibrahim Traoré would be ready. And when they came again, and they would find that the lion was still watching, still waiting, still fighting. Stay tuned, because the fight for Burkina Faso has only just begun.